What's up everyone, my name is Joe and welcome to Film Focused. First off, I'd like to say Happy New Year, and I hope you guys had a great holiday season celebrating with you and yours, wherever that may be. Today, it's about 20 degrees outside and we have almost a foot of snow on the ground in Virginia Beach, so I thought it'd be a good idea to stay inside with a nice cup of coffee and talk about cameras, more specifically, the Pentax 67ii. So the Pentax 67ii is a medium format SLR system that shoots 6x7 negatives on 120 or 220 rolls of film. Now the 67ii is hands down one of my favorite camera systems ever made, and quite possibly my favorite SLR, film or digital, that I own. I'm not saying this camera is perfect by any means, no camera is, but the pros definitely outweigh the cons in my opinion. Now, the two big flaws with this camera system are the flash sync speed and the physical size and weight of the camera. The flash sync speed is set to 1/30th of a second and can't really be changed unless you're using a leaf shutter lens like the 90mm 2.8. So you can work around it, but I have used this camera in the studio and synced at 1/30th of a second, and it's gotten beautiful results, no problems at all. It's a little bit of a hassle, but you can work around it. Now the size and weight matter. This is an absolute beast of a camera. It's a huge hunk of metal and it will really weigh you down when you're out in the field. But if you're willing to deal with that, it can lend you some amazing results. Because this is such a big camera, it also has a really big mirror in front of the shutter. That results in a lot of vibration running through the camera system every time you release the shutter. This means you can really only get sharp results handheld at 1/125th of a second. Now on the top right, we have your shutter button, which also has your lock, on, and self-timer switch. The self-timer is set to 10 seconds and can't be adjusted, but you do have the option to use a threaded cable release through the shutter itself. Like I said earlier, you can only sync at 1/30th of a second, and there is no hot shoe on this camera. I forgot to mention that earlier. You can only sync with flashes through the sync port with this system, which is another part of that downside of using this in the studio. So it's a little bit of a hassle, but if you're able to work around it, then good for you. Alright, so on the top of the camera, we have your film advance lever, and right here is the multiple exposure slider. To engage this, you would simply release your shutter button to take a frame, and then before you actually advance the lever, you slide this over with your finger, and while it's slid over, you then advance the film. And it's a little bit of a pain to do, but it's definitely doable. I've used it before and it works fine. A little bit of the pain in the butt though. Then you would simply release the shutter again, and the camera functions normally. Next to that, we have your little LCD screen. This is one of the main differences between the 67ii and the original 67. On the original, this was simply a little dial that was really hard to read. It was really small, so having the LCD screen is really, really nice. This also is your frame counter, so it'll count up with you. The only bad part is that it can't be illuminated at night, so if you're in a really dark place or you're running low on light, you might not be able to read what ISO you're set at or what frame you're on. Really minor little grief I have with the camera, but it works just fine. So to set the ISO, there you can see this little button right here. It has a slider, and it's kind of hard to see right now, but there is a button just below where it says ISO. So the camera must be on, and let's say we want to go up to 400. You take this slider and you slide it up with one finger, and while the slider is slid, you would then press in the button and the numbers go up. You can also hold this down and it'll kind of go at its own rate, and it can go all the way up to 6400, and let's see how far down it can go. Probably 25 is my guess. Oh, it can go all the way down to ISO of 6, which is really, really low. I didn't even know it could do that, but I'm gonna put it back to 125 because I was shooting some Portra 400 in this, or excuse me, Portra 160 the other day, so I'm just gonna keep it there. Now, the ISO is only really significant if you have a prism that has a metering system through it. Now, this camera does, and you can see here through the exposure compensation dial that this prism finder actually has the metering system housed inside of it. There are other prisms that you can buy that don't have the metering system built in. They're a little bit less expensive. And if you're buying this camera online, like most people do, everyone has a different camera. So you could actually have a waist level viewfinder or a prism finder that does not have a metering system in it. There's a whole bunch. It's a completely modular system, which is one of the biggest benefits of this camera system. Over here, you also have the metering style. You have a center weighted, a spot, center weighted, and then a matrix, just a full spectrum there. To take this off and to change it, there are these two little buttons on the side that you actually need to twist, which isn't too difficult to do, and then press in at the same time. That releases this. You can see the focusing screen here, and this camera can only focus in the center of the viewfinder. It's a minor problem or con with this camera system, but it doesn't really hinder me as I've been used to working with these kinds of cameras for a long time now. On the left side of the camera, you have your shutter dial. This ranges from bulb all the way to 1/1000th. Can't speak today. You also have the option to shoot in aperture priority mode. The camera takes over control of the shutter, and it actually will work in half stops, not just full stops. So if you're in between 1/500th and 1/1000th, it will actually shoot at 1/750 for you, but you can't actually manually set that with the shutter dial. There's also this little red X right here, and that's what you would use if you were syncing with any lights that were off camera. You can also see here on the side right there, it's kind of hard to see right now, but there's a little X. That's actually where your sync port is located. So now on the front of the camera, I'm going to go over everything you really need to know about. Right here, you can see this little dial. It is your mirror lockup function. So once the camera is set to take a photo, you lift this up. The mirror is now locked up, so you can't see through the viewfinder anymore. But this is great for shooting landscapes because now there will be no vibration from the mirror going up. It'll just be the shutter releasing once you release the shutter button. And then you wind it right back and it works perfectly normal. This little slider right here, this releases the lens from the camera body, which is really simple. Line up the red dots, put it right back on. On the lenses, you have your aperture preview slider here, which is really handy if you're taking landscape shots or you're setting up a pretty important image. This function works really, really well. Now on the back of the camera, you have your little memo slider and a nice little thumb catch, which really helps for the ergonomics of actually holding this camera for a long time. To open the back, there's a little notch right here on the side of the camera, and you just slide that down with your nail or your finger, and the camera back opens right up. Like most film cameras, you have the area where you would put in a new spool of film, and your take-up spool goes over here. These little spring-loaded triggers here or clamps rather, that keep your film nice and tightly rolled are one of the best and the most annoying features of this camera. So if I unroll a new roll of film and I put it in and I just leave it, the film isn't going to unroll and you're not going to get any light leaks on your film. A really, really great feature. But because of that, when you're actually putting in a new roll of film, you pull down these tabs here, you twist and pull down. It can be a pretty big pain in the butt to get the film to actually lock into the knobs just right. It takes a little bit of getting used to, but it's a really minor problem. But other than that, this camera works perfectly great, and I love it to death. This is where the image area is exposed. You can see the shutter curtain is drawn like most DSLRs, or SLRs rather. So do not touch this. Try not to get your film in contact with this. They're meant to last, but if you do end up contacting it, the oils on your finger could degrade the actual fabric that's used, and you don't want to puncture it because then your camera is broken and then you have to spend more money on it to get it fixed. So don't do that. Here, similar to the Mamiya 7 II, you have the option to use 120 or 220 rolls of film. It's a little bit easier to switch in between the two. You simply depress this little platter and then slide it over to whichever film type you want to use. I only shoot 120, so there's no problem there for me. It also tells you on the back of the camera what type of film you're shooting, so you know, and you aren't surprised when you get to your 10th shot and the camera says you're done with your roll, because it should. Right here, you also have the option to use a meter lock or an exposure lock. So let's say you are shooting a sunset or a nice landscape scene and you want a meter for the shadows. Hold down this button, it locks in your exposure, you then recompose and take your shot, and it works just fine. It's really, really simple. Now on the bottom of the camera, we have where your battery goes in. You just use a screwdriver or just carry around a quarter or a nickel with you, and it'll come off just fine. Now this camera uses two 3-volt 123 batteries. They're pretty common and easy to find and pretty cheap, which is a really nice feature about this camera. Thank you to the user who asked that question on the Mamiya 7 video. I forgot to include that, and I will make sure to include that in the rest of my videos. So to put these back, you stack them on top of one another, and both of the positive ends go into the bottom of the camera, and it has a nice little spring here, so you actually have to press it in and then tighten it. And I like to use, a little tricky there, I like to use a nickel or a quarter to get the thread going and lock it in nice and tight. Now, like most film cameras, and unlike most DSLRs, this camera is not weather sealed at all. So you have to be really careful whenever you're shooting in either bad weather conditions or maybe at a beach, like I do a lot. So a lot of sand and dust and dirt can get into the system, but because it's completely modular, it can come all the way apart, and you can really do a good job of getting into those little small nitty-gritty areas and doing a great job of cleaning it out. So be sure you take really good care of this camera. Because these are older film cameras, they can be a little bit harder to find places that service these nowadays. So do your best in either investing in one that's been serviced already, or try and find a place that will service this before buying it, so you have somewhere to go to just in case you run into a problem. You also have your standard tripod thread, which works wonderfully, and I would absolutely suggest bringing a tripod with you whenever you're shooting with this camera. Right here, you have lugs that connect to that awesome wooden grip handle that you would like to use, which is really cool looking, but doesn't really serve a great function because you still have to manually focus and set your aperture and all that jazz. So it looks really cool. It's great for lugging it around, but it's kind of more well-versed for the original 6.7 than for this model. Now, because this is a 6x7 camera, converting the lenses back to 35mm is pretty simple. You either half it or double it depending on which way you're converting. So this is a 105mm f2.4 lens on a 6x7 camera. On 35mm, that would be a 53mm lens that shoots at 1.2. That's insane. But on a medium format camera, there's physically more image area to work with. So when you're shooting at that shallow of a depth of field, you're still getting physically more in focus, more information, more detail when shooting on a larger format. One of the major benefits of shooting this camera. Like I said earlier, no camera is perfect, but to me, this one comes pretty darn close. In my opinion, every photographer, hobbyist, professional, enthusiast, whomever, everyone should absolutely try this camera at least once in their life. You will not regret it. It's a phenomenal camera system to work with, and it is super fun to shoot, so don't miss out on your chance to shoot one of these if that crosses your path. So the most commonly asked question about this camera system must be whether or not to buy the original 6.7 or the 6.7 II. And in my opinion, hands down, get the 6.7 II. There are a few minor differences that make a major difference in the two systems, and I'll let you know the 3 reasons why I went for this system as opposed to the older one. The first reason being it's a newer system. I mean, they stopped building these in 1998, I believe. I could be wrong, but I think that's right. So it's still a relatively young camera. So you can find them that were really well taken care of, used online for a really good price, and it's definitely worth getting an excellent or a mint condition camera, because then it doesn't have any lingering issues or something that might be wrong with the camera. It's definitely worth a little bit of extra money. Now, probably the biggest in terms of holding the camera and using it is the grip. On the original 6.7, both sides of the camera looked like this, so you had nothing for your fingers to dig into and really wrap around to hold it. It was kind of a silly design feature, and they definitely made up for it with the 6.7 II. It's great in the hands, it's heavy, but it feels really sturdy and it's very fun to shoot, so definitely a major improvement with the 6.7 II. Additionally, you ran into an issue with the viewfinder on the original 6.7. There is a little kind of slit right here where these little pins are, and the viewfinder connected to the lens through those pins. So if the lens was on or off, like I said, I can't remember, you could theoretically rip out that lever that connected the viewfinder to the lens, and then you had to get your camera serviced because it wouldn't be able to meter anymore. It was a really weird feature. I don't know why they designed the camera that way, but the 6.7 II, they fixed it. Get the 6.7 II, it's a much better camera. Okay, so with all that being said, this is a portrait and landscape photographer's dream camera. It is so much fun to use and it yields amazing results. Any hobbyist, enthusiast, or maybe just someone who's really interested in film photography, you should probably pick up this camera or at least try it once in your life too. Now, I wouldn't recommend this as a street camera or your everyday camera for a few reasons. One, you're really going to draw attention to yourself. It's kind of hard to hide this in the street. People see it and they probably think it's like a gun or something. I mean, it's massive. And the other reason being, this can be heard from like a mile away. So you're not really going to be able to sneak up on people or get, really good candid shots without really getting found out in the public space. But you can get amazing portraits and amazing landscapes with this system. With the update of the Pentax 67ii II, they also updated a handful of the lenses and actually maybe introduced one or two new ones. And you can kind of tell the difference between the focusing rings with the old system lenses and the newer ones. So the little kind of tooth grooves are the newer SMC Takumar lenses, and then the ones that have those really wide dips around the focus ring are the older lenses. That's one of the easiest ways to kind of differentiate between the two. Both sets of lenses are absolutely phenomenal and really well revered. But if you can, pick up the newer lenses. The extra coatings are great to have. Don't forget to put a UV filter on top to protect the lens and to help improve your image quality. So with that said and done, I'd like to show you guys a short little slideshow of some of my favorite images that I've shot with this camera. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If there's anything I missed or anything you might want to know about this camera, please leave it in the comments section below. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. Thank you everyone for stopping by. I really appreciate your time. Hope you all have a great day, and I'll see you next time.